Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about some of the best long campaigns in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. The reason I'm doing this video is that based on the campaign AI betas, Creative Assembly is certainly aiming to improve longer campaigns in Warhammer 3. Now, they've got a lot of work to do. Some things are specific to Legendary Lords, some issues are specific to races, some issues are just inherent Warhammer 3 issues. But what do I think would make a campaign good from a long campaign perspective? Well, first off, it can't just be a race that is completely dominating the campaign map without a care in the world in the long term, or even the early game. That disqualifies Wood Elves, Warriors Cast, and yes, Cast Dwarfs. Because Cast Dwarfs, sure, they have that build up, but once they build it up, they're nigh on unstoppable. A single Cast Dwarf army will annihilate anything that stands as a path. An endgame Cast Dwarf army, specifically. That's what I'm talking about. And I don't really think that's a great playstyle in the long term. Sure, there's a lot of parts to manage with the Cast Dwarfs, which is good, but the problem is they're too ridiculous. They're too weak early on. They scale up too slow, but once they get there, they're just completely annihilating everything in their path. It has to be some kind of balance. It can't just be too tedious. It can't just be constant management. It can't just be fighting every single battle manually in a campaign. But it can't just be like, I've won, I'm just wasting my time for the turn button simulator. And I think certainly Cast Dwarfs do end up in that position after a couple of dozen turns in their campaigns. So with that in mind, let's first start off with Boris Ursus. Some people will swear by Katrin, some people will swear by Kastaltin, some people will swear by Stankin, but I think Boris Ursus is the best Legendary Lord of Kisv to play in a long campaign. First off, Kisv's unit roster is actually a very solid, diverse roster. So you have infantry, you have archers, you have artillery, limited as it is with little Groms, but you do have various options that are very good and importantly scalable throughout the course of a campaign. So you're never going to be in a situation where, I've been playing this campaign for a while, but the units I have and the armies I have are just not really good enough. And regardless of what I do, they're not going to be the top tier. Kisv can get some really good armies. And crucially, they can get a bunch of armies that are really solid in manual battles, but also do pretty well in auto-resolve. Because, yes, once you start playing a campaign long enough, you kind of get tired of fighting minor settlement battles. And that is something to be avoided. But overall, Kisv does have a good situation on army roster. They have a good economic situation at the moment. After their rework, they get a bunch of heroes, hero capacity, hero ranks. Their research tree also gives them a significant number of benefits like campaign movement range benefits, various benefits to growth, construction cost, for various buildings, different diplomacy benefits or allied recruitment benefits. It's all great. But really what I think makes Kisv stand out is the court and orthodoxy system. Because you end up with some very nice benefits over here through the court and orthodoxy system. Now, I would not put Katrin and Kastaltin on this list. The reason is Katrin and Kastaltin have a very annoying situation dealing with the court and orthodoxy, whereas Stankin and Boris Ursus will just handle the supporter system much better and unlock a lot of the awesome things that are available over here. So things like newly colonized ruins have a greatly reduced construction cost and duration for 1 turn, for instance. That is a pretty substantial benefit, or growth in all provinces. Those are pretty good benefits, but really crucially, when you think about Kisv and the lore, what defines Kisv? Well, them standing up to chaos. Well, they get spiritual conquest, which gives them population surplus for newly conquered settlements, and 100 devotion for newly captured settlements in a chaos wasteland climates. So that gives you an incentive, a strong incentive to actually go conquer the chaos waste, which is not something you usually see in a lot of campaigns, which is, by the way, what Kisv should be about. That single bit of support or benefit does help you work things out here much better, because you'll end up being able to use devotion more. You'll end up with a lot of benefits from that perspective. It just is a playstyle that does work. And when you combine it with immune to mountain attrition, crucially immune to chaos waste attrition, you have a campaign where you might not start in the best position to tackle the chaos waste, but you will certainly get there. So it's very thematic, it's very appropriate, it just works. Now, Boris Ursus is better at this, not just because of supporters. He has a better climate situation than the other Kisv campaigns. Crucially, he has Wasteland, so that means the Darklands are available. That makes for a much better long campaign inherently, because it means that you're not just looking at the Empire in Norska or the Chaos Waste, you're also looking at this entire section of the campaign map being available to you, which is not something that works out really well for Castalton or Katrin. It does work out for Astankia, but Boris Ursus also has that Chaotic Wasteland benefit in his campaign. So because of those kind of benefits, as well as his skill line, just general campaign situation, I would say Boris Ursus has the scalability and the campaign's incentives to have a really, really good campaign from a longer term. You can play Katrin in the early game, and Castalton in the early game in Astankia, but it is really in the long-term situation where Boris benefits. To be sure, he does have a pretty strong early game, but it's really that longer campaign benefits. Like things like construction time, -1 for provincial capital and settlement buildings is a significant benefit when you're playing a longer campaign. Just a couple of notes there. And number 4, we have Ekclaw of the Skaven. Now, Skaven inherently have a couple of benefits with respect to longer campaigns. To begin with, it is because of the food situation. So whenever they take over a settlement, they can spend food to get a settlement all the way up to tier 5. Now, there are, of course, drawbacks with respect to this, to be sure, but it is a system that works, and crucially, it is a system that does scale. And that is really important. On top of that, Skaven have a good selection of lords, have a good selection of heroes, have a good selection of units. Not all units are worth recruiting in a Skaven campaign. Their infantry situation is lacking, but this is where Ekclaw really comes in, because you do have different legendary lords focused on different playstyles for the Skaven. Like Queek is about storm vermin and clan rats, also chieftains. Trench is about storm vermin, Front is about monster units, and individual unit customization. Well, individual unit customization ends up being a hassle in Front's campaign. Snitch has the focus on assassins, but that's just not really a great army in a long campaign because, yeah, auto-resolve is a factor. Great campaign mechanics, but not necessarily the best dynamic. But this is where Ekclaw, I think, wins out. First off, he doesn't have the same hassle that Front does have. If you're playing an Ekclaw campaign, you just flat out get benefits for all your units faction-wide that you will be using. You construct nuclear weapons on the campaign map. This is all very, very solid to use because it's not like, oh, I have to worry about all of these different units and all these different armies. That can work early on, but once you're playing a campaign after a certain time and you get dozens of armies or a dozen armies roaming around the campaign map, you do get tired about having to micromanage everything, and that's certainly an issue in Frost's campaign. But with Ekclaw, you do have overall army customization over here, or army buffs that you do get through these upgrades in the Forbidden Workshop. And I think that is overall a good system. Furthermore, because Ekclaw is focusing on specific units, well, you look at these units, right? You look at a weapon team specifically. You look at Wrangling Gunners, Jezzails, Warpfire Throwers, Warpriders, Poisonware Mortars. Not only are these good units, but importantly, when you're thinking about units, they're also pretty solid overall, or as solid as Skaven units will be in our result, because a lot of these units have a pretty good amount of armor, which is the primary reason that so many other campaigns, so many other races suck in Auto Resolve. It's not the combat ability. Auto Resolve represents nothing in terms of combat ability. It does, however, represent armor. And because you have that playstyle, which is, by the way, a fun playstyle with all these range units, focus and gunpowder units and Gatling guns and all that, you do end up having a generally better army situation than other Skaven. To be sure, you can. There's nothing preventing you if you're playing an Ekclaw campaign to also make other types of armies in your campaign, but certainly the focus is on this building chain of the arsenal and also the building chain of the warp turbine plant to the exclusion of other things. Like, you should use other things. You should certainly get Assassin's Hero for replenishment, Chieftains for melee combat power, And of course, Pact Masters for the kind of benefits that they do provide in a campaign. Also, Ashen Sorcerers are pretty decent as well to get in a Skaven campaign. So there's all kinds of different options that do work fairly well with Ekclaw. It's not just like, oh, I'm just going to purely get gunpowder units with Ekclaw. Okay, what is going to support those gunpowder units? Are you going to go with some beasts? Maybe you'll go with some infantry, or you'll go full on gunpowder. Those options are all viable, and I think that's a great thing. Is the inherent scalability of the Skaven in a longer campaign, combined with Ekclaw's focus in a campaign, that does make it work quite well from a long campaign perspective. The downside, from my view, with Ekclaw's campaign is that the early game is not an especially good one. In fact, it's kind of one of the worst ones in the game, but if you do go for that and you're looking to play a longer campaign, it will work out quite well over here. At number 3, we have Morafi of the Dark Elves. Now, the Dark Elves are certainly the kind of race that does excel in terms of early game aggression. Looting and sacking income, post-battle loot, slaves, instant construction, unit recruitment from Black Arcs. It all works out very well in the early game, especially when you're looking at Morafi. But those same kind of benefits also apply to a long campaign quite well as well. Because you end up having armies that each of them can end up having all of the heroes that you want. Sure, Morafi does have the downside of requiring tier 4 to be able to increase Knight Assassin capacity, though that is not really that much of an issue in a campaign. And while the late game units of the Dark Elves do leave quite a bit to be desired, you do have a very solid army roster all the same for the Dark Elves overall available to you. So that ends up working. Your economy is insanely scalable. You have instant construction available, which is a very significant benefit available in your campaign, in any campaign. But it is actually better than Chaos Dwarf instant construction, because Chaos Dwarf construction is relatively slow. They have instant construction to make up for it. Whereas Dark Elves have regular construction times, but have instant construction as a benefit anyway. So that ends up working very, very well at building a large empire across the campaign map. A further benefit to Morafi specifically this time is that she does get Sun-Eshi Corruption and all the kind of benefits that do come from Sun-Eshi Corruption as well. So that is very good, very solid. But on top of that, Dark Elves in general have a pretty interesting diplomatic situation to deal with. The only race that despises Dark Elves in the campaign is actually the High Elves, for pretty clear, obvious reasons. Other people may dislike you to a degree or another, though usually speaking it is that minus 40 aversion, or better. But with minus 40 you can manage diplomatic situations, so this is what makes Morafi's campaign in particular well. What makes her campaign really strong is her starting position close enough to Wolf-One so she can knock Wolf-One out of the game. Also close enough to Masamudi and other Legendary Lords that she can manipulate. You have a lot of flexibility in how you're dealing with diplomacy in this campaign. You can ally the Order Tide, you can ally the Chaos Tide, or you can have a weird alliance of Chaos Tide and Order Tide factions. The only factions you'll have to fight are the High Elves. So you're really uniting the world to just kill the elves, High Elves specifically. I think the dwarves would approve. And it's kind of funny as well because you can become really good ally. A really good ally with the dwarven factions, the dwarven legendary lords. You have that flexibility available in the campaign in a way that, say, Skaven don't have because almost everyone despises them and doesn't trust them, for good reason I should add. With Kisv, you have the focus on fighting chaos, but with Dark Elves inherently, you don't have a focus on fighting anyone in particular except High Elves. And let's just put this simply, there's a lot less High Elven factions on the map than there's Chaos factions, or Order Tide factions in general. So you do have that kind of diplomatic flexibility, you do have that kind of power, which creates a very dynamic campaign situation for you to deal with when you're playing Morafi or when you're playing Dark Elves in general. But I do think Morafi just stands out. She's a really powerful caster. She can get more mages than other people. She's a pretty good melee lord. She has a good starting position. She has that Sinnelleos corruption. She just works better. Like, Lokir might be better in an early game situation, but I think Morafi, because partly due to climate. Like, you might think Chaotic Wasteland, Frozen, and Temperate is not that great until you realize how much of the map is Frozen or Chaotic Wasteland or, well, really Frozen. But even with unpleasant climates, Dark Elves do actually have enough benefits to their economy that they can make it work in a way other races can't. Like, Lokir might have some more better climates that are suitable, but he also has a really bad unsuitable situation, uninhabitable situation. Morafi is kind of in between. So you end up having that kind of situation to work with during the course of your campaign. Climate-wise, diplomacy-wise, recruitment-wise, hero capacity-wise, it all ends up working quite well. The only downside, I would say, in Morafi's campaign and where Lokir wins out is with regards to how many Black Arcs you'll have. Black Arcs are fun, but you're severely limited because of that 25-turn cooldown. I think that's something Creative Assembly should look to change. At number 2, you have Emperor Karl Franz of the Empire. And his campaign is really geared towards empire building and especially very well suited for playing longer campaigns. The reason behind that is when you look at Karl Franz, clearly he has systems that are designed for longer campaigns in general. So in order to unlock the electric count units, the items, the titles, you have to take control over the rest of the empire. That's just to begin with. Then you have to summon the electric counts ability, and the more of the empire you hold, the better off you'll be. Though that does apply in every Imperial campaign. Karl Franz is just better at it. Gelt and Elspeth are better in the early game, and Elspeth is better at having far more powerful armies than Karl. But Karl is really good at managing a large empire across the campaign map. Not inherently to the empire as a race, but rather to Karl Franz's mechanics, which are based on Jan Bo's mechanics, but to put it plainly, Karl Franz is much better as a legendary lord than Jan Bo. So if we look at Karl Franz, we get electoral machinations. Crucial things over here. You get surplus points, you get the ability of doing faster recruitment, you get the ability of reducing corruption, you get the ability of sending aid. All of these kind of things are really great in both the early game, but also in the long term. Then you have a guaranteed confederation with other electric count factions. And you can also improve or decrease relations between electric count factions. But here's the kicker in this campaign. Beyond all these items and units and titles, etc., that affect the empire, you also have a particular bit of research that really changes the game for Karl Franz in his campaign in terms of the world. You get Emperor of the Empire, which causes all decree actions to be much better. Crucial, you also have to get Conclave of Allied, so you can use your prestige to improve or decrease relationships between Empire High Elves, Kisv, Bretonnia, Dwarf, and Cathay factions. So Karl Franz is really building the shield of civilization over here through this. And unlike the High Elf influence, you'll have a lot of prestige to play around with. So you do have those choices and the consequences to those choices to play around with in a campaign. But more importantly, those decrees being increased or being made better gives Karl one enormous benefit in his campaign. Specifically, beyond the obvious fact that all of these being buffed is going to be a powerful benefit, but specifically what makes Karl Franz so much better than the other Imperial factions at playing a longer campaign is while he lacks Elspeth's teleportation, he does have Unify. And Unify, once upgraded, applies to any Imperial faction, and it's guaranteed as a confederation. So if you're playing a Karl Franz campaign and you want to get your hands on Gelt and his territory in Cathay, you can do so. You just got to get Vision, which is not really that tricky. You do have to send at least a hero or a lord to Khemri to get Volkmar and one to Lustrat to get Marcus Wolfhard, but you do have that kind of capability in a campaign, which opens up far more possibilities in a campaign than you otherwise would have. Elspeth again has teleportation, but she needs to gain Vision first, And she needs to go there, and then she needs to deal with diplomacy. And Confederation for diplomacy is just not really that great. Confederation through prestige is a substantially better mechanic than what anyone else has to deal with. And all these other benefits, like recruitment benefits, experience, all that, these play well, especially in a longer campaign. The sheer amount of power and flexibility you end up having when you're playing Karl Franz is great. You're never in a situation, though, where you're just ridiculously brokenly powerful. You have to fight for it. You have to earn that power as Karl Franz. And I think that's one of the things that sets this campaign apart from even others on this list. It is not a free ride. It's not the worst auto-resolve situation or the worst battle situation in general in the game, but it's also not the easiest. It's not like playing Castors or Khorne or others and you just like, yeah, every battle past a certain point is a auto win. Because by the way, that does happen in so many other campaigns. No, that doesn't work for Karl Franz. It might work for Elspeth, and even then she has some limitations. It certainly works for Gelt with a Mage Doom stack. It can work for Elspeth with certain army types. Gelt just works inherently. But yeah, Karl Franz may not have the best armies, but he certainly has the best style on the campaign and the best management of a campaign of all the Imperial Legendary Lords and the vast majority of Legendary Lords in the game. And I'm really glad for the kind of changes Creative Assembly has made to this campaign. I can tell you, I played this campaign with the AI beta and it was a lot more fun than before because you have to manage things not just in the early game but also long term. Finally, at number 1 is Malachi Makason, though not because of his adventures, not because of the various units that you can really buff up by doing these kind of adventures. Though to be sure, having those adventures, having those longer term objectives in a campaign does make it more fun. And it is absolutely a benefit that elevates Malachi over the Dwarven Legendary Lords because he has other things to do, other things to worry about than just conquering territory. He's also not the bullshit broken level of Grombrindle. Like, you want to see a broken dwarf campaign, play Grombrindle. You'll demolish everyone that stands in your path. Whereas Malachi has to earn it in his campaign. He has to fight a bunch of Legendary Lords. Sure, it can be easy. It can also go sideways very damn quickly when you're playing this campaign. And that's one of the fun factors, I would say. But really, from a long campaign perspective, beyond the inherent benefits that Malachi gets in his campaign through adventures, having those quests, having those objectives, going on this journey, which requires you, by the way, to go all the way to beat the crap out of Grimgor and Drasov, which is saying quite a bit. Like, some of your adventures take place pretty damn far south, like, you know, Karazakarak type situation, actually even further south than that. That is a hell of a campaign journey inherently. But on top of that, it is the way dwarves work. So Legendary Grudges create these kind of campaign objectives that you're always aiming for. I think the rewards could be improved, or rather the amount of salad grudges you get should be improved in some way, shape, or form. But at least you do have these longer term objectives. Again, I think there's some improvements, like if, you know, I like Kisv, maybe they should be able to take Norska, maybe it should apply to allies, that kind of stuff, right? For some of those Legendary Grudges. So I think, but I think inherently the system of Legendary Grudges just creates a far more dynamic and interesting campaign situation to deal with. But really, the prize, as I see on Malachi, is like with Karl Franz, you have that guaranteed confederation of other Legendary Lords. I think it's better for Malachi because he doesn't need to see them, nor does he need to upgrade anything for it. He can just do it once he gets a certain amount of settled grudges, over 7,500, in order to confederate other Legendary Lords. Funnily enough, by the way, this is actually available in Realms of Chaos. So if you're playing a Malachi Realms of Chaos campaign, you can actually get all the Dwarf Legendary Lords in Realms of Chaos. It ends up being as ridiculous as it fucking sounds, I should add. Surprising, I think Malachi actually has the best campaign in Realms of Chaos. Saying quite a bit about ROC, isn't it, though? That's more saying about Realms of Chaos than Malachi himself. But what's really important over here is because you choose. And when you confederate one lord, you can't just easily turn around and confederate the other, because you're going to increase the amount of settled grudges that you need to get them. And I can tell you one thing for a fact. If you're playing Karl Franz, right, consider what the situation is going to be if you're playing Karl Franz. You know that Gelt is never going to die in Cafe. You know that Marcus Wolfhard is unlikely to die. Elspeth depends on your direct actions in the area. The only one who's really at risk is Volkmar. That's the only dynamic situation that you have to deal with in a Karl Franz campaign. It's great, it works, but it's not as dynamic as it does get over here. Because you look at Grombrindel. He may be wiped out. Sometimes he succeeds, but most of the time he gets wiped out. Then you have Forgrim. Does he win? Does he get wiped out? Belagar usually survives. Ungrim can survive, can be wiped out. So you have, inherently when you're playing dwarves, you have that kind of dynamic campaign situation with the Legendary Lords. You're not just playing one dwarf. You're playing all dwarves. Or you eventually end up playing all dwarves. What I think elevates Malachi compared to everyone except Grombrindel is the fact that of his climate. He has Frozen, he has Wasteland, he has Mountain, and he has Savannah. That is basically the majority of climates that all dwarf legendary lords except Forik have to deal with. And even with Forik, do you really want to play in the jungle as Forik? I can tell you, I've played that campaign. The jungle is the last damn thing you give a shit about. Like, who really wants to fight the campaign against Kairos Fate Weaver? Who, exactly? Find me that person. Who exactly enjoys dealing with Kairos Fate Weaver? Find me their names. So you end up with a really solid climate situation that Malachi has to deal with, which means that when you're confederating Grombrindel, for instance, or you're confederating Ungrim, or you're confederating Forgrim, you're not just getting the Legendary Lord, you're getting their territory and their own hazards in the area, and you ideally want to deal with it. Sure, you could ignore it, just play your campaign, the little corner that you have, but I think dwarves work best when you're not just playing in a small portion of the campaign map, but when you're looking to restore the dwarven realm. And I think that is what Malachi is really, really good at in his campaign. He has that inherently. His campaign is far more dynamic than pretty much every other campaign in the game, or the vast majority of campaigns. Arbol is pretty good, I'm not gonna lie, but let's not kid ourselves. Like, Arbol is amazing from the early game, but long term, yeah, he doesn't hold a candle to what Malachi has to offer. That's all I had to say. Questine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.